They said the horse was worthless until a skinny boy approached. When he mounted and rode like a champion, everyone stood up. The dawn light crept reluctantly through the holes in the abandoned barn's roof, painting dusty shafts across Jaden Carter's face. His eyes snapped open, body tensing from another nightmare. Same one as always, screeching tires, shattering glass, his mother's final scream. 13 now, but in his dreams, he was always 8, the age when everything broke. He sat up in the pile of straw that served as his bed, brushing fragments from his tangled hair. 5 years since the accident. 6 foster homes since then. 2 years on his own. Numbers that defined his existence but told nothing of the hollow space inside his chest. Outside, Kentucky was stirring. From this dilapidated barn on the edge of a neglected property, Jaden could see the manicured fields of Lexington's horse country stretching toward the horizon, white fences and emerald pastures where million-dollar thoroughbreds grazed like living sculptures. So close, yet impossibly distant from his world. His stomach growled, reminding him of more immediate concerns. Time to find work. The back roads of Lexington had become Jaden's map, which stables hired day labor, which kitchen doors might offer leftovers, which security guards could be avoided. Today, he headed toward Westbrook Stables, where sometimes the aging foreman would exchange mucking stalls for a sandwich and a few dollars. "Hey, kid," the foreman called as Jaden approached cautiously. "You're in luck. Got 6 stalls need cleaning before the owner visits. Same deal as last time." Jaden nodded silently, taking the shovel and wheelbarrow without complaint. The less he spoke, the less people questioned. Questions led to authorities, and authorities led back to the system he'd escaped. As he worked methodically through the stalls, he overheard the stable hands talking in low voices. "You hear about that crazy horse over at Havenbrook?" asked a red-faced man with tobacco-stained fingers. "Thunderstorm?" "Yeah, damn shame," replied an older hand. $2 million of horseflesh gone mad after that Derby accident. Thornton's about ready to put him down, I heard. Third trainer quit yesterday, left with a broken arm. "Can't blame the animal," said a quieter voice. "Watching your jockey die while you're still strapped to him? That'd break anyone's mind." Jaden slowed his shoveling, ears prickling at the conversation. "You met Thornton?" asked the youngest stable hand. The older man spat on the ground. "William Thornton III doesn't meet people like us. He owns people like us. Oil money from Texas, bought his way into Kentucky racing, thinks everything has a price tag. Well, that horse is going to cost him. $2 million down the drain if he can't get him racing again." Jaden leaned the shovel against the wall, reaching into his pocket to touch the worn harmonica. His father's last gift. His mind drifted to memories of his dad, an immigrant horse handler who spoke more freely to the animals than to humans. "The horses don't hear your words, Jaden," he'd say in his accented English. "They feel your heart beating. Remember this always." His father had possessed something rare, an ability to calm the most frightened horses with just his presence. From his earliest memories, Jaden had watched his father approach fractious colts without ropes or whips, just patience and understanding. And somehow, that gift had passed to him. By mid-afternoon, he'd earned his sandwich and $5. But his mind kept returning to the story of Thunderstorm. A broken horse and a broken boy. There was something in that symmetry that pulled at him. "Where's this Havenbrook place?" he asked the foreman before leaving. The man looked surprised to hear Jaden speak. "About 3 miles east, big white columns at the entrance. Can't miss it. But don't go getting ideas. Thornton's security doesn't take kindly to trespassers." Jaden nodded, pocketing his earnings. The warning only strengthened his resolve. At Havenbrook Estate, William Thornton III swirled bourbon in a crystal glass, his third of the evening. Around his mahogany dining table sat investors and racing connections, the air thick with cigar smoke and forced laughter. "This damned animal is costing me a fortune and ruining my reputation," Thornton growled, his Texas drawl more pronounced with each drink. "I've given him the best trainers, the best facilities, and he repays me with ingratitude." The guests murmured sympathetic platitudes, careful not to contradict their host. If there's no progress by month's end, he's dog food, Thornton concluded, slamming his glass down for emphasis. From the corner of the room, Joe Williams watched silently as he waited to clear plates. At 70, Joe had spent 5 decades working with thoroughbreds, the last 20 at Havenbrook. His weathered black hands bore the scars of a lifetime around horses, and his eyes held wisdom Thornton would never purchase. Later, as Joe cleaned the kitchen alongside Mrs. Martinez, the Mexican housekeeper, he shook his head sadly. "That horse ain't mean," he said quietly. "He's terrified. I've seen that look before in horses that survived barn fires. It's not anger in those eyes. It's pure terror." Mrs. Martinez crossed herself. "Mr. Thornton only sees the money, Joe. Always the money." $2 million, Joe muttered. "That's all Thunderstorm is to him, not a living creature with a soul." Outside the kitchen window, dusk was settling over Kentucky's rolling hills, and somewhere in the growing darkness, a thin figure was making his way toward the back fence of Havenbrook Estate. Jaden moved like a shadow, years of avoiding detection serving him well. He scaled the rear fence where the security cameras had the widest blind spot, dropping silently onto Havenbrook soil. In the distance, the main house blazed with lights, voices, and laughter carrying across the manicured lawns. But Jaden's attention was drawn to a solitary structure set apart from the main stables, a small barn with a single light burning. Something told him that's where they'd keep a problem horse. As he approached, he heard it, a rhythmic thudding of hooves against wood, the sound of an animal in distress. He slipped through a side door, finding himself in a shadowy aisle. The building held 6 stalls, but only one was occupied. In the golden glow of Kentucky's twilight filtering through high windows, Jaden saw Thunderstorm for the first time. The magnificent black thoroughbred stood at least 17 hands tall, but was pressed into the farthest corner of his stall. Once powerful muscles had atrophied, his coat dull where it had been glossy in the racing photos Jaden had glimpsed. Scars marked his flanks, some from the infamous accident, others newer. But it was the horse's eyes that captured Jaden, wild with distrust, rolling white at the edges, eyes that had seen death up close. When Thunderstorm noticed the boy's presence, his ears pinned flat against his head, and he snorted a warning, striking the ground with a foreleg. Most would have retreated. Jaden sat down, positioning himself about 15 feet from the stall door. He simply settled cross-legged on the concrete floor. He made no sudden movements, no attempt to approach. Instead, he pulled his father's harmonica from his pocket and raised it to his lips. The melody was simple, something his father had played on countless evenings as the sun set over various stables where they'd lived. The notes hung in the air between boy and horse, neither demanding nor pleading, just existing. After a few minutes, Jaden lowered the instrument and began to speak. His voice was soft, almost a whisper, raspy from disuse. "I know how it is, friend," he said, eyes level with the stall door rather than trying to meet the horse's gaze directly. Being afraid of everything and everyone, not trusting anybody. Waking up every day expecting more pain. Thunderstorm's ears flickered toward the sound, though his stance remained defensive. "I'm not going to pretend I know what happened to you, but I know fear. We live in the same house, you and me." For nearly an hour, Jaden simply remained there, sometimes playing brief melodies, sometimes talking softly about his day, about the stars beginning to appear through the high windows, about how the air smelled of fresh hay and distant rain. He never attempted to approach, never raised his voice, never made demands. "My dad used to say horses remember everything," he said conversationally. "Every kindness, every cruelty. People think that makes you guys stubborn, but I think it makes you smart." As time passed, he noticed subtle changes. The horse's breathing slowed. The white-rimmed panic in his eyes receded slightly. He remained in his corner, but his head lowered a few inches from its high-alert position. When Jaden decided it was time to leave before security made rounds, he stood up slowly, every movement telegraphed. "I should go," he said softly. "But I'll come back if I can." It was then that something extraordinary happened. Thunderstorm took a single step forward, toward Jaden. Not aggressively, but with cautious curiosity. For a fleeting moment, the massive horse and the small boy looked directly into each other's eyes. A silent recognition passed between them, the recognition of two souls equally wounded, equally wary, equally looking for something lost. For Jaden, it was the first true connection he'd felt since his parents' death. For Thunderstorm, perhaps the first moment of peace since the accident that had shattered his world. Neither moved closer, neither needed to. In that moment, a bridge had formed across an impossible divide. Jaden backed toward the door, never turning his back on the horse. "See ya, Thunderstorm," he whispered. What he didn't see was Joe Williams standing in the shadows by the barn entrance, having followed the unusual sounds of harmonica music. The old man's mouth hung slightly open, his eyes wide with disbelief. As Jaden turned to leave, he nearly collided with Joe, gasping in surprise and preparing to run. Joe held up his hands in a peaceful gesture. "In 50 years working with horses, I've never seen anything like that, boy," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "And if you come back tomorrow, I promise not to tell a soul." Joe's weathered hand rested gently on Jaden's shoulder. "Tomorrow," he whispered. "Come before sunrise. The security guards change shifts at 5 and there's a 20-minute gap. Use the service entrance by the east paddock. I'll leave it unlocked." Jaden hesitated, years of survival instincts screaming caution. But something in the old man's eyes, a kindness he hadn't seen directed his way in years, made him nod. "Thunderstorm wasn't always like this," Joe continued, his voice barely audible. "He used to be magnificent. The accident." His voice trailed off. He saw his jockey die, right there beneath him, felt the man's last breath. "Some wounds don't show on the skin, boy." Jaden glanced back at the stall where Thunderstorm had retreated to his corner again. "I know," he replied simply. That night, sleeping in his usual barn 3 miles away, Jaden couldn't stop thinking about those eyes, deep pools of fear masquerading as rage. For the first time in months, he didn't dream of the car crash. Instead, he dreamed of running alongside a powerful black horse, both of them finally free. Dawn hadn't yet touched the Kentucky hills when Jaden slipped through the unlocked service entrance. The air hung heavy with dew, the world silent except for the occasional snort or shuffle from the stables. True to his word, Joe waited by Thunderstorm's isolated barn, a thermos in his gnarled hands. "Thought you might want some coffee," he offered. "Gets cold these spring mornings." Jaden accepted the thermos with surprise. "Thanks." The warmth seeped into his perpetually cold fingers. "He had a rough night," Joe said, nodding toward Thunderstorm's stall. "Dawson, that's the new trainer Mr. Thornton hired. Tried to force a bit in his mouth yesterday evening. Got kicked out of the stall for his troubles." Jaden frowned. "Force doesn't work with fear." Joe's eyebrows rose slightly. "No, it surely doesn't. Where'd you learn about horses, boy?" "My dad," Jaden replied, the words coming easier than expected. "He worked with problem horses all over Kentucky before." He stopped. "Before." Joe nodded, understanding the unspoken. "I'll keep watch. Take your time." Inside, Thunderstorm was even more agitated than the previous evening. A fresh cut on his lip confirmed Joe's story about the failed attempt with the bit. When he spotted Jaden, he snorted aggressively, pawing at the ground. Instead of approaching the stall, Jaden sat a few feet further back than yesterday. "You decide," he said softly. "Always you decide." For nearly an hour, Jaden simply sat, occasionally sipping the coffee. He didn't play the harmonica, sensing the horse needed quieter energy this morning. Instead, he pulled a battered copy of The Old Man and the Sea from his jacket pocket, a treasure salvaged from a school dumpster months ago. "Found this in the trash," he explained to Thunderstorm. "It's about a man who respects what he hunts, even though he needs to catch it to survive. Reminds me of my dad. He always said you have to respect what's wild." He began reading aloud, his voice gentle and unhurried. The words of Hemingway filled the space between them, creating a bubble of calm in the anxious atmosphere. By the time pink light began filtering through the high windows, Thunderstorm had stopped pawing and stood with his head slightly lowered, one ear cocked toward the boy's voice. "Same time tomorrow?" Jaden asked as he prepared to leave. This time the horse made no move forward, but the whites of his eyes had receded, a small victory. Outside, Joe waited, eyebrows raised in question. "He listened," was all Jaden said. "Mrs. Martinez usually throws out the breakfast leftovers around 8, Joe mentioned casually. "Back door of the main house. She's got a soft spot for strays." The pattern continued for days. Each morning before dawn, Jaden would slip through the service entrance where Joe had left the door unlocked. Each morning, he would position himself slightly closer to Thunderstorm's stall, but never forcing proximity, always allowing the horse to determine the distance. Some days he read from his book. Other days he played soft melodies on the harmonica. Sometimes he simply talked about the weather, about other horses he'd seen, about nothing in particular. The content mattered less than the consistency, the predictable gentleness that stood in stark contrast to the horse's recent experiences. On the fourth day, Mrs. Martinez accidentally left a plate of eggs and tortillas by the barn door. "Such a shame." Joe grinned when Jaden looked questioningly at the food. "She's always making too much." By the end of the first week, Jaden had moved his sitting spot to just outside Thunderstorm's stall. The horse still kept his distance within the enclosure, but his posture had changed, head carried lower, ears often pointed forward instead of pinned back in aggression. Then came the setback. Jaden arrived one morning to find Thunderstorm more agitated than ever, trembling in his corner, a fresh cut above his eye. "Dawson," Joe explained grimly when Jaden emerged concerned from the barn. "Mr. Thornton's getting impatient. Brought Dawson back with those goddamn spurs of his. Said he needs to show that animal who's boss." Jaden's fists clenched. "That's not training. That's torture." "I know it, boy. You know it. But men like Thornton and Dawson, they only know one language: dominance." That morning, Jaden didn't attempt to move closer. Instead, he returned to his original position, giving Thunderstorm the space his renewed fear demanded. For 2 hours, he simply sat and hummed, letting the horse know that nothing was expected, nothing demanded. "I won't abandon you," he promised before leaving, "no matter how scared you get again." 3 days later, during a particularly rainy morning when thunder rolled across the Kentucky hills, something unexpected happened. As Jaden read quietly from his dwindling chapters of Hemingway, Thunderstorm approached the front of his stall. Slowly, cautiously, the massive black head extended over the half door, nostrils flaring as he took in the boy's scent. Jaden continued reading, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. He didn't reach out, didn't move. He simply allowed Thunderstorm to investigate at his own pace. The horse exhaled softly, his warm breath stirring Jaden's unruly hair. Then, as a particularly loud thunderclap shook the barn, Thunderstorm startled. Instead of retreating, Jaden instinctively began to sing, a Spanish lullaby his mother had sung during storms when he was small. His voice was unpracticed but gentle, the melody simple and soothing. To his amazement, Thunderstorm calmed, then extended his head further until his muzzle rested lightly on Jaden's shoulder. The first touch. Complete trust. A bridge finally crossed. Jaden continued singing, tears welling in his eyes. For a moment, he wasn't an orphan sleeping in abandoned barns. He wasn't a system runaway. He was simply a boy connecting with a kindred spirit. Unbeknownst to either of them, Joe had witnessed the moment. That evening, he showed his cell phone recording to Sarah Johnson, a respected equine veterinarian who'd been called to check another horse at Havenbrook. "I've been hearing rumors," she said, studying the video with professional intensity. "But seeing it," she shook her head in wonder, "that boy understands something few adults comprehend. Horses are flight animals. He's letting Thunderstorm choose to trust, not forcing him to submit." "Kid's got nothing," Joe said. "No home, barely enough food. But he comes every morning, rain or shine." Sarah handed back the phone, her expression thoughtful. "My father always said true horsemen are born, not made. I'd like to meet this boy." The next morning, Sarah arrived under the pretense of a follow-up visit. Standing at a distance, she observed as Jaden sat cross-legged before Thunderstorm's stall playing his harmonica. The horse, who had attacked 3 professional trainers, stood calmly just inches away, head lowered in relaxation. "That's not just talent," she murmured to Joe. "That's something special." Word began to spread quietly through Lexington's equestrian community. Some scoffed at the idea of a homeless boy succeeding where professionals had failed. "Sentimental nonsense," declared one trainer at the country club. "The animal needs discipline, not coddling." But others, particularly the old-timers who'd spent lifetimes around horses, recognized something extraordinary in the reports. A few deliberately drove past Havenbrook in hopes of glimpsing the boy and the mad horse. Meanwhile, Thornton's patience was wearing dangerously thin. During a lavish party at the mansion, he led a group of intoxicated guests to see the $2 million monster he planned to send to the glue factory the following week. Jaden, hidden in the shadows of a nearby shed, watched in horror as one man tossed an empty bourbon bottle into Thunderstorm's stall, laughing when the horse reared in panic. "Useless beast," Thornton slurred. "Final deadline is Friday. Then he's meat." The next morning, Joe and Mrs. Martinez intercepted Jaden with grim faces. "Mr. Thornton has made arrangements," Mrs. Martinez whispered, her eyes red-rimmed. "Thunderstorm is to be transported to the slaughterhouse on Friday morning." 3 days, Joe added. "I'm sorry, boy. We tried to change his mind, but—" Jaden stood silently, processing the news. Then, with a determination that straightened his thin shoulders, "I'm staying with him tonight." "Security," Joe began. "I don't care," Jaden interrupted. "I won't let him face this alone." That night, with Joe's reluctant assistance, Jaden slipped into the barn after evening security rounds. Thunderstorm nickered softly in recognition as the boy settled into the straw beside his stall. "I don't know what to do," Jaden admitted in the darkness. "But I'm not giving up on you." He played his harmonica deep into the night, soft melodies that carried across Havenbrook's silent fields. By dawn, a small crowd had gathered outside the barn. Stable hands, gardeners, kitchen staff, even a few curious neighbors who'd heard rumors of the boy who could tame the untamable horse. As morning light filtered through the windows, Jaden made a decision. With steady hands, he unlatched Thunderstorm's stall and entered, something no one had done safely in months. From a hook on the wall, he took a simple rope halter. "Your choice," he whispered to the horse. "Always your choice." To the astonishment of the growing audience, Thunderstorm lowered his head, allowing Jaden to slip the halter on without resistance. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. With gentle guidance, Jaden led the horse from his stall for the first time since the accident. Outside in the small paddock, Thunderstorm blinked in the morning sun, momentarily disoriented by freedom. Then, in a movement that drew gasps from the crowd, Jaden climbed the paddock fence and slid onto Thunderstorm's bare back. No saddle, no bridle, nothing but trust. For a breathless moment, horse and boy remained motionless. Then, responding to the lightest pressure of Jaden's legs, Thunderstorm began to walk. His stride, once famous on racetracks across the country, was hesitant at first, then increasingly confident as they circled the paddock. Tears streamed down the faces of the toughest stable hands. Mrs. Martinez crossed herself, whispering prayers of gratitude. And Sarah Johnson, who had arrived just in time to witness the miracle, discreetly filmed every moment on her phone. "The deadline is up," announced Thornton coldly to the staff as he checked his Rolex watch later that morning. "Thunderstorm will be sent to slaughter in 3 days, unless someone wants to buy a defective horse for $2 million. He laughed, not noticing the desperate glances exchanged between Joe and Mrs. Martinez behind him. Sarah Johnson's phone captured every moment, Jaden guiding Thunderstorm around the paddock with nothing but gentle leg pressure and whispered words, the massive thoroughbred responding with increasing confidence. The once wild animal moved with a grace that hinted at his racing pedigree, his ears pricked forward instead of pinned back in terror. As she lowered her phone, Sarah knew this footage would change everything. Within hours, the video began its journey through Lexington's equestrian community. A stable hand shared it with his cousin at Keeneland. A groom forwarded it to a former jockey. By nightfall, the extraordinary sight of the killer horse carrying a barefoot boy had reached the phones of trainers, owners, and breeders across 3 counties. The next morning, Jaden approached Havenbrook with caution, uncertain how his unauthorized ride would be received. He found Joe waiting at their usual meeting spot, face grave but eyes alight with suppressed excitement. "Word's out, boy. Miss Johnson's video is everywhere." And Joe glanced over his shoulder before continuing. "Mr. Thornton knows. He's on his way here now, and he's bringing security." Jaden's heart sank. "I need to see Thunderstorm first. He'll be confused without our morning routine." Joe hesitated, then nodded. "Go. I'll stall them as long as I can." In the barn, Thunderstorm greeted Jaden with a soft nicker, stretching his neck over the stall door. The trust they'd built over weeks shone in the animal's eyes that no longer rolled white with panic. Jaden reached up to stroke the horse's forehead, marveling at how something that had seemed impossible just days ago now felt natural. "They're coming for me, big guy," he murmured, pressing his face against Thunderstorm's warm neck. "But I won't let them take you away. I promise." The sound of multiple vehicles crunching on gravel broke the moment. Through the barn window, Jaden spotted 3 black SUVs approaching, Thornton's signature Bentley leading the procession. "Stay calm," he whispered to Thunderstorm, whose ears had already begun swiveling toward the commotion. "Whatever happens, stay calm." The barn door swung open with enough force to rattle the walls. William Thornton III strode in, his expensive Italian loafers incongruous against the straw-covered floor. Behind him came 2 men in security uniforms, hands hovering near their belts. "So this is our trespasser," Thornton said, eyes narrowing as they assessed Jaden's threadbare clothes and unkempt appearance. "The street rat who's been interfering with my property." Jaden said nothing, standing his ground despite the trembling that started in his knees. "Get him out of here," Thornton barked at the security guards. "And call the sheriff. Breaking and entering, trespassing, attempted theft of valuable property. That should be enough to get him into juvenile detention where he belongs." As the guards advanced, something unexpected happened. Thunderstorm, sensing the threat to Jaden, thrust his powerful head over the stall door and let out a warning snort. The guards hesitated, eyeing the notorious killer horse warily. "Sir," one began, "maybe we should—" "Are you afraid of a horse?" Thornton sneered. "Just grab the kid." When the first guard reached for Jaden's arm, Thunderstorm exploded into motion. With a piercing neigh, he reared up, massive hooves pawing the air dangerously close to the men. The guards scrambled backward, nearly colliding with Thornton. For the first time, the oil magnate saw the true power of the animal he'd purchased, not directed in wild fear, but in deliberate protection of the boy. Thunderstorm positioned himself between Jaden and the intruders, ears pinned flat, nostrils flared in warning. The standoff was broken by Sarah Johnson's calm voice from the doorway. "Mr. Thornton," she said, stepping into the barn with purposeful strides, "I believe we need to reconsider the situation." Thornton turned, recognizing the respected veterinarian. "Dr. Johnson, this is a private matter." "This is a matter of extraordinary significance to the equestrian community," she interrupted smoothly. "That video of Jaden and Thunderstorm has already reached Churchill Downs. People are calling it miraculous." She gestured toward the tableau before them, the massive thoroughbred standing protectively near the small boy. "This young man has accomplished in weeks what your professional trainers couldn't achieve in months. Perhaps you should consider the possibility that he has something to teach, not to learn." Thornton's face flushed, but his businessman's mind was already calculating new angles. The horse he'd been ready to discard as worthless was suddenly the center of attention again. And attention, properly managed, meant money. "Very well," he said after a long moment, straightening his custom suit jacket. "The boy can continue coming, supervised. If he can get this animal running again, we'll have something to discuss." After Thornton and his entourage departed, Sarah turned to Jaden with a mixture of admiration and concern. "That was quite a display. Thunderstorm really bonded with you." Jaden nodded, still stroking the horse's neck. He just needed someone to listen instead of demanding. "Well, you've bought him some time," Sarah said, "but Thornton isn't doing this out of kindness. Be careful." The next morning, Jaden arrived to find Joe waiting with unexpected news. "Mr. Thornton left instructions. You're to be given a room in the staff quarters, meals, and some new clothes. Says it'll facilitate your work with Thunderstorm." Jaden frowned, suspicion immediate. "Why would he do that?" "Don't know," Joe admitted. "But Mrs. Martinez has already made up a bed for you. First real one you've had in a while, I'm guessing." The room was small but clean, with a window overlooking the training paddocks. Jaden ran his fingers over the crisp sheets, throat tight with emotion. That night, lying in an actual bed, he stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep despite the comfort. Everything in his life had taught him that gifts came with hidden costs. His instincts proved correct. While Jaden worked with Thunderstorm each day, making remarkable progress, Thornton's lawyers were quietly investigating his background. They discovered that Jaden Carter was officially a minor who had run away from his 6th foster home 2 years ago. The system had essentially lost track of him, until now. Meanwhile, local reporters began appearing at Havenbrook's gates, drawn by the story of the troubled horse whisperer, taken in by the generous oil magnate. Thornton played his part perfectly, presenting Jaden to the media as a discovery of his youth outreach program, never mentioning that he'd initially tried to have the boy arrested. "The boy has a natural gift," Thornton told a journalist from the Lexington Herald, his arm draped paternally across Jaden's shoulders for the cameras. "I'm simply providing the opportunity for that talent to flourish." Jaden endured these performances stoically, focusing instead on Thunderstorm's progress. Each day brought new milestones. The horse now accepted a soft halter, followed Jaden willingly around the paddock, and had begun responding to subtle leg cues when ridden bareback. Staff members watched in amazement as the once violent animal followed the boy across the fields like a devoted dog. "It's like they speak the same language," whispered a groom to Joe. "They do," Joe replied. "The language of the broken." From his office window, Thornton observed these sessions with calculating eyes, noting how Thunderstorm's physique improved daily. The hollow flanks filled out, the dull coat regained its shine, muscles once again defined beneath the sleek black hide. The commercial value of his investment was clearly recovering. 2 weeks after Jaden's official installation at Havenbrook, Thornton summoned him to the main house. In the mahogany-paneled study, surrounded by trophies from past racing victories, Thornton got straight to the point. "I'm organizing a charity event here at Havenbrook," he announced. "All the major sponsors, racing officials, and press will attend. Thunderstorm will be the centerpiece, proof of my stable's innovative training methods." Jaden shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, Thunderstorm isn't ready for that kind of pressure. He's making progress, but he still has nightmares. I can tell by the way he—" "Listen carefully, boy." Thornton's voice hardened, the paternal mask slipping to reveal the cold businessman beneath. "You work for me now. That horse cost $2 million, and it will be ready for the event in 2 weeks. Jaden stood his ground. He needs more time to recover psychologically. Pushing him too fast will set him back. Perhaps I haven't made myself clear." Thornton leaned forward, all pretense gone. "I have friends in social services who would be very interested to know the whereabouts of a certain runaway from the foster system." The threat hung in the air between them. "You have 2 days to reconsider your position," Thornton continued. "Cooperation or consequences. Your choice." The next morning, when Jaden tried to visit Thunderstorm as usual, he found 2 security guards blocking the stable entrance. "Sorry, kid. Boss's orders. No access until further notice." Through the open stable doors, Jaden could see Thunderstorm pacing anxiously, head high, nostrils flaring as he caught the boy's scent. Without their morning routine, the horse was already reverting to agitated behavior. That evening, Joe and Mrs. Martinez found Jaden sitting dejectedly behind the staff quarters, his untouched dinner beside him. "He'll destroy Thunderstorm," Jaden said, voice breaking. "Not directly, but by pushing him before he's ready." Mrs. Martinez sat beside him, her weathered hand covering his. "Thornton has done this before, mijito. He destroys horses for publicity, then discards them. And nobody ever stands up to him because he practically controls half the jobs in this region." Joe nodded grimly. "But this time, people are watching. Miss Johnson has been making calls. Her father still has influence in this state." "Robert Johnson?" Jaden looked up. "The trainer who won the Triple Crown with Firestorm?" "The very same," Joe confirmed. "And Miss Sarah has also connected you with a lawyer named Miguel Ramirez. Specializes in children's rights. He's agreed to take your case for free." For the first time since Thornton's threat, Jaden felt a flicker of hope. "Can I still see Thunderstorm?" Joe glanced toward the main house. "Not officially, but I've been working here 20 years. I know when the security cameras malfunction." He winked. "Tonight, around midnight, I'll make sure the back gate is unlocked." Under the cover of darkness, Jaden slipped through the property toward Thunderstorm's stable. Rain had begun falling, muffling his footsteps and obscuring visibility. Perfect conditions for stealth. Inside the stable, Thunderstorm recognized Jaden's scent immediately, nickering softly in the darkness. The boy wrapped his arms around the horse's powerful neck, burying his face in the warm mane. "I can't let them hurt you again," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "But I also can't abandon you." As they stood together in the dimly lit stable, Jaden made his decision. He would find a way to protect Thunderstorm, no matter the personal cost. What neither boy nor horse could know was that across town, Sarah Johnson was already putting plans in motion, using her authority as a veterinarian to document the evidence of past mistreatment, while Miguel Ramirez prepared legal documents late into the night. "I know Thornton has done this before," said Robert Johnson, the 80-year-old legend of Kentucky racing, as he leaned on his cane in Sarah's living room. "Men like him confuse money with character, but they've forgotten something important. In Kentucky, horses have always been more respected than millionaires, and it's time someone reminded him of that." Robert Johnson's words hung in the air like a promise. Across Lexington, the pieces of a resistance were falling into place, small, determined, but growing with each passing hour. The next morning, Jaden was escorted to his new accommodations with a formality that felt more like surveillance than hospitality. A staff member Jaden hadn't seen before led him through a side entrance of the sprawling Havenbrook estate, past manicured gardens where workers paused their pruning to watch curiously. "This will be your room," the man said, opening a door in the staff quarters wing. "Mr. Thornton thought you'd be more comfortable here, closer to the stables." Jaden stepped inside, immediately scanning the space with the wariness of someone accustomed to catching the angles in any situation. The room was modest, but undeniably luxurious compared to abandoned barns and foster home couches. A twin bed with a blue quilt occupied one corner, a small desk another. The window overlooked the training paddocks, offering a direct view of where he worked with Thunderstorm. When the staff member left, Jaden approached the bed cautiously, as if it might disappear. His fingers traced the clean sheets, marveling at their crisp smoothness. He hadn't slept in a real bed since his last foster home, the one where the father drank and the mother pretended not to notice bruises. "There are clean clothes in the dresser," came Mrs. Martinez's voice from the doorway, "and dinner is at 6 in the staff dining room." Jaden turned, finding her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Why is he doing this?" he asked. Mrs. Martinez's eyes darted to the corner of the ceiling where a small camera was mounted. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Be careful, Jaden. Mr. Thornton never gives without expecting something in return." That night, lying in comfort that felt alien after years of hardship, Jaden stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep despite the soft mattress. Everything in his life had taught him to question sudden kindness. Foster parents who bought gifts usually wanted something from social services. People who offered food often expected information in return, and billionaires who provided shelter to homeless boys certainly had motives beyond charity. Meanwhile, in the wood-paneled study of the main house, William Thornton III, conducted a conference call with his legal team in Louisville. "I want everything you can find on the boy," he instructed, swirling bourbon in a crystal tumbler. "School records, foster care history, any juvenile offenses, anything we can use if necessary." "We've already started preliminary research, Mr. Thornton," replied the lead attorney, Jaden Carter, 13 years old. "Parents died in a vehicular accident approximately 5 years ago. No living relatives located. He's been through 6 foster placements, the last one ending when he ran away 2 years ago. Technically, he's still a ward of the state." Thornton smiled thinly. "Perfect. Keep digging, and contact my friend Jenkins at Child Protective Services. I want to understand exactly what leverage we have." The next morning brought the first reporters to Havenbrook's gates. Sarah Johnson's video had done more than circulate among horse people. It had caught the attention of local media. A morning show reporter requested an interview about the miracle recovery of the infamous thunderstorm. Thornton, ever the strategist, seized the opportunity. Jaden found himself ambushed after his morning session with Thunderstorm, suddenly facing cameras and a microphone thrust toward his face. "And here he is!" Thornton exclaimed, draping a proprietary arm across Jaden's shoulders. "The remarkable young man I discovered working with horses at a neighboring property. I immediately recognized his natural talent and brought him into our youth development program." Jaden stiffened under the unfamiliar touch, but Thornton's fingers dug warningly into his shoulder. "Tell them how Havenbrook has given you this opportunity," Thornton prompted, his smile never reaching his eyes. I just understand Thunderstorm," Jaden managed, eyes downcast. "He was scared, not mean." "Such intuition," Thornton beamed at the cameras. "This is exactly why our program identifies disadvantaged youth with special abilities and provides them with mentorship and resources." The reporter seemed charmed by the narrative of the wealthy benefactor and the underprivileged prodigy. Jaden endured the interview, answering minimally, focusing instead on Thunderstorm, who watched from his paddock, ears pricked forward in concern at his friend's discomfort. After the reporters left, Thornton's paternal mask slipped away. "Get that horse running properly by next week," he instructed coldly. "The charity event will feature Thunderstorm as the centerpiece, proof of Havenbrook's revolutionary training techniques." Each day that followed established a pattern. Mornings with Thunderstorm brought Jaden peace. The horse continued to progress, now accepting a soft saddle pad, responding to voice commands, and even allowing Joe to approach when Jaden was present. Their connection deepened beyond words, a partnership based on mutual respect that the staff watched with growing amazement. "Look at that," whispered a groom as Thunderstorm followed Jaden across the field like a faithful dog, no lead rope necessary. "I've never seen anything like it." "The boy doesn't control the horse," Joe explained to anyone who would listen. "They've agreed to move together. There's a difference." From his office window, Thornton observed these sessions with calculating eyes. The hollow-flanked, dull-coated animal he'd been ready to discard was transforming daily. Muscle definition returned beneath the sleek black hide. The wild-eyed panic had subsided. Thunderstorm was beginning to resemble the champion he'd purchased, an investment recovering its value. What Thornton failed to understand was the psychological dimension of Thunderstorm's recovery. The horse still startled at sudden movements, still positioned himself to keep exits in view, still trembled when unfamiliar men approached. These weren't signs of defiance, but of ongoing trauma. Something Jaden recognized from his own experiences. "He's getting better," Jaden explained to Sarah Johnson during one of her visits. "But he still has flashbacks. You can see it in his eyes. Suddenly he's back there, feeling his jockey die. I can tell by the way he freezes and his breathing changes." Sarah nodded, making notes. "Trauma doesn't disappear, Jaden. We just learn to manage it better. You're giving him tools to cope." "Mr. Thornton doesn't understand that," Jaden said quietly. "He thinks Thunderstorm should be completely fixed by now." 2 weeks into Jaden's stay, tensions escalated. Thornton summoned him to the main house, to the trophy-lined study that celebrated equestrian victories bought rather than earned. "The charity event is in 2 weeks," Thornton announced without preamble. Thunderstorm will demonstrate a full gallop around the main track, with you riding. We'll have sponsors, racing officials, and press in attendance. Jaden shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair that seemed to swallow his thin frame. Sir, Thunderstorm isn't ready for that kind of pressure. He's making progress, but he still has nightmares. Yesterday, when a camera flashed during our session, he panicked. It triggered a memory. I'm not interested in horse psychology, Thornton dismissed, irritation creeping into his voice. That animal represents a substantial investment that needs to start showing returns. If we push him before he's ready, we'll lose all the progress we've made. He needs more time to… Listen carefully, boy. Thornton's voice hardened as he leaned across the desk. You work for me now. This isn't a negotiation or a discussion about feelings. That horse cost $2 million, and it will be ready for the event. When Jaden's expression remained resolute, Thornton's demeanor changed. The businessman calculated a different approach. Perhaps I haven't made myself clear. He opened a folder on his desk, revealing documents Jaden recognized as foster care paperwork, with his name and photo. My attorneys have been doing some research. Technically, you're a runaway, a ward of the state who disappeared 2 years ago. I have friends in social services who would be very interested in your current whereabouts. The blood drained from Jaden's face. You're threatening me. I'm explaining reality, Thornton corrected smoothly. You have 2 days to reconsider your position. Either Thunderstorm performs as required, or I make a call that sends you back into the system, likely to a juvenile detention facility, considering your history of running away. Cooperation or consequences? Your choice. The next morning, when Jaden attempted his usual session with Thunderstorm, he found 2 security guards blocking the stable entrance. Sorry, kid. Boss's orders. No access until further notice. Through the open doors, Jaden could see Thunderstorm pacing anxiously in his paddock, head raised, nostrils flaring as he caught Jaden's scent. The horse whinnied, a high-pitched call of distress that pierced Jaden's heart. By evening, reports from the stable hands confirmed what Jaden feared. Thunderstorm had refused food, kicked at his stall, and shown aggression toward anyone who approached. Without the consistency of their morning routine, the horse was backsliding rapidly. He's brought in another trainer, Joe informed Jaden as they sat behind the staff quarters. Some hotshot from Texas who specializes in problem horses. Mrs. Martinez joined them, setting a plate of food beside Jaden that he couldn't bring himself to touch. This new trainer tried to mount Thunderstorm this afternoon, she said quietly. The horse nearly destroyed the stable. 3 men couldn't control him. Thornton will destroy him, Jaden said, voice breaking. Not directly, but by pushing him before he's ready. Thunderstorm isn't stubborn. He's terrified. Every time someone forces him, it confirms his fear that humans only cause pain. Mrs. Martinez placed a weathered hand over his. We know, Mijito. What Thornton does, it is not new. He has done this before with other horses. He breaks them for publicity, then discards them when they're no longer useful. Nobody stands against him because he controls so many jobs in this region. Joe nodded grimly. But this time is different. People are watching. And Miss Johnson, she's been making calls. Her father still has influence in this state, Mrs. Martinez added. And she has connected you with a lawyer, Miguel Ramirez. He specializes in children's rights and has agreed to help you without payment. Hope flickered in Jaden's chest for the first time since Thornton's threat. Can I still see Thunderstorm? Joe glanced toward the main house. Not officially, but I've worked here 20 years. He winked. Security cameras sometimes malfunction, especially during rainstorms. Tonight, around midnight, I'll make sure the back gate is unlocked. In the darkness of midnight, with rain providing cover, Jaden slipped through the property toward Thunderstorm's stable. The horse recognized his scent immediately, nickering softly in welcome. When Jaden entered the stall, Thunderstorm pressed his head against the boy's chest, breathing in his familiar presence. I won't abandon you, Jaden whispered, wrapping his arms around the powerful neck. But I don't know what to do. As thunder rumbled in the distance, Sarah Johnson was sitting in her father's study across town. Robert Johnson, 80 years old but still commanding respect throughout Kentucky's racing world, stood studied the documentation his daughter had compiled. "Thornton has gone too far this time," Sarah insisted. "Using a child as leverage, threatening him with the system, all to force a traumatized horse to perform? We can't let this stand." Robert Johnson tapped his cane thoughtfully against the floor. "I've known men like William Thornton III for decades," he said, his voice steady despite his age. "Men who confuse money with character, who think everything and everyone has a price. But they've forgotten something important. In Kentucky, horses have always been more respected than millionaires, and it's time someone reminded him of that." The night wrapped around Havenbrook Estate like a shroud, rain pattering against the stable roof in a gentle rhythm. Robert Johnson's declaration about horses being more respected than millionaires in Kentucky remained suspended in the air, a battle cry for what was to come. Across town, in that same moment, Sarah Johnson was already putting her father's words into action. The following morning, Jaden found Sarah waiting for him outside the staff quarters, a tall man in a crisp suit beside her. "Jaden, this is Miguel Ramirez," she said, gesturing to the man whose kind eyes contrasted with his professional demeanor. "He's an attorney who specializes in children's rights cases." Miguel extended his hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Sarah has told me about your situation. I want you to know something important. Being an orphan doesn't mean you don't have legal protection." Jaden studied the man warily, years of system disappointments making trust difficult. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "I was in foster care myself until I was 16, Miguel replied, his voice softening. "And I've spent my career making sure other kids don't face what I faced. Thornton may have power, but he's not above the law, especially when it comes to coercing a minor." Inside Thunderstorm's stable, chaos had erupted. Without Jaden's calming presence for 2 days, the horse had regressed dramatically. His feed bucket lay untouched, water barely sipped. The once progressing thoroughbred paced his stall obsessively, stopping occasionally to release mournful whinnies that carried across the property, calling for the boy who had become his lifeline. "He hasn't eaten since yesterday morning," Joe reported grimly when he found Jaden later. "And Thornton brought another trainer, Wilson, from California. Has some reputation with difficult cases." By mid-morning, Jaden could hear the commotion from across the property, men shouting, the crash of equipment, and above it all, Thunderstorm's terrified screams. He ran toward the training ring despite Joe's warning hand, arriving breathless to a scene of devastation. The California trainer lay sprawled in the mud outside the ring, clutching his shoulder. Inside, Thunderstorm galloped frantically around the perimeter, eyes wild with panic, saddle hanging sideways beneath his belly where he'd tried to buck it off. 3 handlers with catch ropes positioned themselves around the ring, attempting to corner the frenzied animal. "Stop!" Jaden shouted, vaulting over the fence before anyone could prevent him. "You're making it worse!" The handlers froze, uncertain, as Jaden walked slowly into the center of the ring. Thunderstorm continued his panicked circling, nostrils flared and flanks heaving with exertion. "Easy, friend," Jaden called softly, not moving toward the horse but simply standing, hands open at his sides. "I'm here now. I'm here." Thunderstorm's gallop slowed to a trot, his head swinging toward the familiar voice. He snorted, still circling but with decreasing speed. "That's it," Jaden continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Remember our mornings? Remember how quiet it is before sunrise? Just you and me." The horse slowed to a walk, ears pivoting forward and back as he processed the familiar presence amidst the chaos. When he finally stopped, sides heaving, foam flecking his coat, Jaden began humming, the same Spanish lullaby that had soothed the animal during the thunderstorm days earlier. Slowly, deliberately, Thunderstorm approached. When he reached Jaden, he lowered his great head until their foreheads touched, a gesture of desperate relief. "I'm sorry I wasn't here," Jaden whispered, tears streaming freely. "I won't let them separate us again." From the fence, handlers and stable staff watched in stunned silence. The horse that had just been a tornado of destruction now stood gentle as a lamb, breath synchronizing with the boys. Meanwhile, across Lexington, Robert Johnson was reaching out to old friends, Retired jockeys, small breeders, trainers who remembered when horsemanship meant partnership, not dominance. In diners and feed stores, at track railings and in tack shops, conversations began, stories shared, allegiances formed. "Thornton's gone too far this time," became a common refrain. Using a homeless kid, threatening him with the system, all to force a traumatized horse to perform, that ain't Kentucky values. Back at Havenbrook, Sarah documented Thunderstorm's condition with professional precision, noting the weight loss, the stress-induced ulcers visible in his mouth, the muscle tremors indicative of severe anxiety. Every observation became evidence in the case building against Thornton's treatment of both horse and boy. As dusk fell, Mrs. Martinez found Jaden sitting alone behind the staff quarters, staring at nothing. "You haven't eaten all day, mijito," she said, setting a plate beside him. "You need strength." "I can't leave him again," Jaden replied, his voice hollow. "You didn't see his eyes today. He thought I'd abandoned him, just like everyone else in his life." Mrs. Martinez sat beside him, her weathered hand covering his. "My husband and I, we never had children of our own. God had other plans." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We have been watching you with Thunderstorm. The way you understand him without words. It reminds me of my father with his horses in Mexico. He always said animals know who we really are, beneath our words." Jaden looked up, surprised by the personal revelation from the usually reserved woman. "Tomorrow," she continued, "you meet my husband, Carlos. He works in the maintenance buildings away from the main house. Thornton never goes there." She lowered her voice. "Carlos has keys to many places, and he has a truck." The implication hung in the air between them, an offer of escape if things became too dangerous. That night, despite the risk, Joe helped Jaden slip back to Thunderstorm's stable. The rain had intensified, providing cover from security cameras and patrols. Inside, the horse recognized Jaden's footsteps immediately, nickering softly in the darkness. "Hey, big guy," Jaden whispered, sliding into the stall. Thunderstorm's massive form moved toward him, and the boy wrapped his arms around the warm neck, burying his face in the coarse mane. "I can't let them hurt you again, but I also can't abandon you." For hours, Jaden simply sat in the straw beside Thunderstorm, sometimes talking quietly about his parents, his time in foster care, his dreams, things he'd never told another living soul. The horse listened in the way that only animals can, without judgment or expectation, his warm breath a comfort in the chilly stable. By morning, the rain had stopped, and the first light revealed Miguel Ramirez working through the night in his downtown office, desk covered with documents illuminated by a single lamp. Child welfare statutes, records from Jaden's case, precedents involving minors being coerced by employers, all arranged in careful piles. His secretary found him asleep at his desk at dawn, still clutching a legal pad filled with notes. Later that day, Sarah introduced Jaden to her father. Robert Johnson arrived at the service entrance of Havenbrook in an understated sedan, his legendary status in Kentucky racing belied by his simple clothes and modest demeanor. Only his eyes, sharp as a hawk's despite his 80 years, revealed the force of character that had intimidated racing commissioners and millionaire owners for decades. "So you're the boy who speaks horse," he said, studying Jaden with undisguised interest. "Show me." In Thunderstorm's paddock, Jaden demonstrated their connection. Without lead rope or halter, he guided the thoroughbred through a series of movements using only whispered words and subtle body language. The horse responded not with the resigned compliance of training but with the willing participation of partnership. "I'll be damned," Robert murmured. Sarah wasn't exaggerating. He approached slowly, respectful of the horse's space in a way that told Jaden he truly understood equine psychology. "This animal has been through hell. You can see it in his eyes, that wariness. But he's not broken. You've kept his spirit intact." Meanwhile, Mrs. Martinez was taking an enormous risk. While cleaning Thornton's office, she carefully photographed documents relating to Thunderstorm's insurance policy, previous training records, and veterinary reports that contradicted public statements about the horse's treatment. Across town, Carlos Martinez met with Miguel Ramirez during his lunch break, passing a manila envelope across the attorney's desk. "My wife took these," he explained, his English precise but accented. "She says to tell you there are more if you need them." Miguel opened the envelope, eyes widening at the contents. "This is exactly what we needed," he said. "Your wife is very brave." "She says the boy reminds her of her brother," Carlos replied simply. "A good soul who needs protecting." That evening, Jaden met Carlos properly for the first time. The maintenance supervisor was a quiet man with calloused hands and dignified bearing. He spoke little but observed everything, treating Jaden with a respect the boy had rarely experienced from adults. "A man who understands horses understands life," Carlos said as they walked the perimeter of the property, ostensibly checking fencing. "My father raised me with horses in Jalisco. We had no fancy saddles, no fancy names for techniques. Just respect. Always respect." In the distance, they could see Thornton's Bentley arriving, another sleek car following. More lawyers, more plans, more threats taking shape. "My wife tells me you sleep in abandoned barns before coming here," Carlos continued, seeming to change the subject. "A boy should have a home. A real home." Jaden said nothing, throat suddenly tight with emotion. "We have a small house not far from here," Carlos added. "Very simple, but there is an extra room. It has been empty too long." Before Jaden could respond, Joe appeared from around a stable corner, expression urgent. "Robert Johnson's got us a hearing with Judge Collins tomorrow morning," he said without preamble. "Sarah's evidence, plus Miguel's documentation of Thornton's threats against you, it might be enough for a temporary restraining order." The following dawn brought Sarah back to Havenbrook, this time in her official capacity as a veterinarian. She methodically examined Thunderstorm, documenting old injuries that had never properly healed, stress-induced conditions, and the physical markers of psychological trauma. "This will strengthen our case," she explained to Jaden as they stood together in the morning light. "But we need more. We need witnesses willing to testify about what they've seen." "Who would risk their jobs to speak against Thornton?" Jaden asked. The answer came throughout the day, as stable hands, exercise riders, and even groundskeepers quietly approached Joe or Mrs. Martinez, offering their observations of both Thunderstorm's treatment and Jaden's methods. A community was forming in the shadows, people who had long resented Thornton's callous approach to both animals and employees. By evening, Robert Johnson had secured a meeting with Judge Collins, a lifelong horseman himself known for his strict interpretation of animal welfare laws. "This case is about more than one horse," Robert explained over the phone to Sarah. "It's about the soul of Kentucky racing." As night fell once more, Jaden slipped away to visit Thunderstorm, guided by Joe through the security blind spots. In the quiet darkness of the stable, he made his final decision. "I won't let him use you as a prop," he whispered to the horse, "and I won't let him send me back into the system. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together." What neither boy nor horse could know was that as first light touched the Kentucky hills the next morning, an unlikely caravan would approach Havenbrook's main gates. Police cruisers, reporters, coincidentally alerted, and a procession of old trucks and cars carrying the most respected names in Kentucky's equestrian community, all united by a cause that transcended social class. While inside the mansion, Thornton would be awakened with news that would make his face turn pale. Dawn broke over Havenbrook Estate, painting the Kentucky hills in watercolor hues of amber and gold. The silence that typically accompanied early morning was shattered by the crunch of tires on gravel as an unlikely procession approached the main gates. Police cruisers led the way, their lights flashing but sirens silent, a restrained show of authority. Behind them came news vans, reporters clutching coffee cups as they prepared equipment for what they'd been told would be a significant story. Most surprising was the caravan that followed, weathered pickup trucks, modest sedans, and even a few tractors carrying the most respected names in Kentucky's equestrian community. Inside the mansion, William Thornton III was awakened by his flustered head of security. "Sir, there's a situation at the main gate," the man reported, his typical composure fractured. Sheriff Donovan is here with deputies. They have some kind of court order. Thornton sat up abruptly, sleep evaporating instantly. What the hell are you talking about? What court order? Something about animal welfare inspection. And, sir. The security chief hesitated. Robert Johnson is with them. So are about 30 other people from the racing community. And there's press. Thornton's face drained of color. Robert Johnson's presence transformed this from an annoyance to a crisis. The old man carried more respect in Kentucky racing than anyone alive, and his involvement meant this would be impossible to dismiss quietly. By the time Thornton descended the marble staircase of his mansion in a hastily donned silk robe, the confrontation had moved to his immaculate front lawn. Sheriff Donovan, a tall man with the weathered face of someone who preferred outdoors to offices, stood uncomfortably holding official papers. "Mr. Thornton," the sheriff began, clearly disliking his position between wealthy power and public duty, "I have a temporary order authorizing inspection of the animal known as Thunderstorm, based on allegations of possible mistreatment." Thornton snatched the documents, scanning them with increasing rage. "This is preposterous. That horse is my property, worth $2 million. You can't just—" "The law is quite clear, Mr. Thornton," interrupted Miguel Ramirez, stepping forward with professional calm. "Animals, even valuable ones, are subject to welfare standards. The evidence presented to Judge Collins was sufficient for this inspection order." Thornton's gaze swept over the gathering crowd with growing fury. Reporters positioned cameras, capturing his disheveled appearance, a stark contrast to his carefully cultivated public image. Behind the media stood faces he recognized from racing circles, many people who had smiled at his parties while apparently harboring judgments. "This is a conspiracy," he snarled, jabbing a finger toward where Jaden stood quietly beside Sarah Johnson. "That meddling boy is an intruder, a runaway. He's been trespassing and interfering with my property." The accusation hung in the morning air, but instead of the intimidation it usually created, Thornton's words seemed to harden the resolve of those present. Miguel Ramirez placed a protective hand on Jaden's shoulder. "My client has been subjected to coercion and inappropriate threats regarding his status as a minor," Miguel stated loudly enough for the reporters' microphones to catch. "We have documentation of Mr. Thornton's attempts to use the foster care system as leverage against a child." Sarah stepped forward, clutching a leather portfolio. "As Thunderstorm's examining veterinarian, I'm prepared to present evidence of long-term neglect of injuries sustained during the Derby accident. My reports indicate a pattern of prioritizing commercial interests over medical recovery." Thornton's face flushed crimson. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he hissed, voice low but intense. "I have connections in Frankfurt, in Louisville. I fund half the racing operations in this state." "We know exactly who we're dealing with, Thornton," came a new voice, strong despite its age. The crowd parted as Robert Johnson made his way forward, leaning on his carved hickory cane. At 80, his frame had diminished, but his presence commanded immediate respect. "I've known your type for decades," Robert continued, his voice carrying across the lawn. "Men who confuse owning with understanding, who think money substitutes for patience. Kentucky was built by people who respect horses, not by those who exploit them." The old man's words struck a chord with the gathered crowd. Nods and murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly of grooms, exercise riders, and small breeders, people whose lives had been dedicated to horses rather than profit. Thornton's retort was cut short by a sound that drew everyone's attention, a powerful, piercing neigh from beyond the manicured gardens. All eyes turned to see a magnificent sight. Thunderstorm, having somehow broken through the paddock fence, was galloping across the expansive field toward where Jaden stood. The horse moved with a fluid grace that belied his traumatic past, mane and tail flowing like black silk against the morning light. Security guards scrambled ineffectually, unsure how to respond to the massive animal running freely across the property. Thornton's face registered shock, then calculation as he realized the potential disaster of his dangerous horse approaching a crowd, But Thunderstorm had eyes only for Jaden. The massive thoroughbred slowed as he approached, his powerful gallop transitioning to a trot, then a walk. With extraordinary gentleness, he stopped before the boy, lowering his proud head in a gesture that required no interpretation. The tableau struck everyone present with its powerful symbolism: the multi-million-dollar racehorse, deemed uncontrollable by professionals, choosing the company of a homeless boy over all others. In the silence that followed, Jaden placed a hand on Thunderstorm's forelock, whispering something that only the horse could hear. Then, with fluid movement that spoke of absolute trust, the boy grasped a handful of mane and swung himself onto the horse's bare back. Without bridle, saddle, or any equipment, Jaden guided Thunderstorm with the lightest pressure of his legs. The horse responded instantly, turning in a perfect circle before walking deliberately toward where Thornton stood with the sheriff and authorities. The image was undeniable in its power: a barefoot boy controlling with kindness what experts couldn't manage with force. Thunderstorm's ears were forward, his previously wild eyes now calm and focused. The transformation was more eloquent than any legal argument. Sheriff Donovan removed his hat, genuine awe evident in his weathered face. "In 25 years enforcing the law in this county, I've never seen anything like that," he said, breaking the silence. Sarah Johnson seized the moment, stepping forward with her medical evidence. "These are records of injuries consistent with abusive training methods," she explained, handing documentation to the sheriff. "The physical evidence corresponds with eyewitness accounts from multiple staff members. My client was coerced through threats of reporting him to social services," Miguel added, presenting his own file. Mr. Thornton explicitly stated that cooperation with his demands was the price of avoiding juvenile detention. Workers from the estate had begun gathering at a distance, many nodding in silent confirmation. Mrs. Martinez stepped forward, her voice steady despite the risk to her livelihood. "I have worked in this house for 15 years, she said. "What happened to the boy and the horse? It is not right. Many of us saw but were afraid to speak." The momentum had shifted completely. What had begun as an inspection was transforming into a public reckoning. Reporters scribbled notes frantically. Cameras captured Jaden sitting calmly atop Thunderstorm, while Thornton's composure crumbled visibly. "This is still my property," Thornton snarled, desperation edging into his voice. "All of you work for me. This horse belongs to me." "Ownership has responsibilities, Mr. Thornton," the sheriff replied, his initial discomfort replaced by certainty. "Based on the evidence presented and what I'm seeing with my own eyes, I'm extending this inspection to all equine facilities on the property." For Thornton, the final humiliation came when several prominent board members of the Kentucky Thoroughbred Association emerged from the crowd. People whose social invitations he had coveted, whose approval he had purchased with donations and sponsorships, now stood as witnesses to his disgrace. "This isn't over," Thornton hissed, his voice low enough that only those closest could hear. "You may have won this battle with your emotional spectacle, but I have lawyers in Louisville, Frankfurt, and Washington who will make all your lives a living hell." His threat might have landed with its intended impact had it not been for a new arrival. A distinguished silver-haired man in an impeccable suit emerged from a modest sedan, adjusting his tie as he approached. "William," he acknowledged Thornton with a curt nod before turning to Jaden. "Dr. Benjamin Walker, American Association of Thoroughbred Breeders. I've been watching the videos of your work with this horse." Dr. Walker observed Thunderstorm with an expert's eye, noting the animal's relaxed posture and attentive focus on Jaden. "Remarkable," he murmured before addressing the boy directly. "Young man, we need to talk about the future, not just for Thunderstorm, but for many other horses." Thornton's face contorted with fury as he watched his narrative of control completely unravel. Where he had expected to intimidate, he found resistance. Where he had expected to assert ownership, he was confronted with responsibility. In that moment, looking at Jaden and Thunderstorm, boy and horse united by mutual understanding rather than force, many present recognized something more significant than a dispute over one animal. They were witnessing a challenge to the very notion that wealth entitled control, that vulnerability justified exploitation. "This isn't over," Thornton repeated between clenched teeth while the cameras continued recording. "You can have your moment with this emotional spectacle, but my lawyers in Louisville, Frankfurt, and Washington will turn all your lives into a living hell." But his threat was eclipsed when Dr. Walker from the American Association of Thoroughbred Breeders approached Jaden and announced, "Young man, we need to discuss the future, not just of Thunderstorm, but of many other horses." Dr. Walker's words hung in the air as cameras continued to roll, capturing the dramatic confrontation on Havenbrook's manicured lawn. The distinguished representative of the American Association of Thoroughbred Breeders stood beside Jaden and Thunderstorm, his presence lending legitimacy to what might otherwise have been dismissed as a local dispute. In the days that followed, Thornton's carefully constructed public image crumbled further as the story of Jaden and Thunderstorm captured national attention. Morning shows featured segments on "The Boy Who Whispers to Horses," complete with Sarah's footage of their remarkable connection. Social media exploded with shares and comments, transforming a Kentucky controversy into a nationwide conversation about animal welfare and the ethics of racing. "This wasn't supposed to happen," Thornton muttered, pacing his study while his PR team offered damage control strategies. The temporary inspection order had evolved into something far more damaging, a spotlight on practices the racing industry preferred to keep in shadow. Meanwhile, in a modest conference room at Lexington's public library, Dr. Benjamin Walker outlined a vision to an unlikely assembly: Sarah and Robert Johnson, Miguel Ramirez, the Martinez couple, Joe Williams, and Jaden, who sat quietly stroking Thunderstorm's blue halter in his lap. "There are hundreds of horses like Thunderstorm," Dr. Walker explained, his passion evident despite his professional demeanor. "Valuable animals written off as lost causes because traditional methods fail them. What you've demonstrated, young man, is that these horses aren't broken. They're simply communicating in ways most trainers don't understand." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "We've been discussing this for years in veterinary circles. Trauma-informed equine care is still considered fringe, but the evidence is growing. What I'm proposing," Dr. Walker continued, "is a foundation, a center dedicated to rehabilitating traumatized horses using the approach Jaden has demonstrated, not just for racing thoroughbreds, but for any horse suffering from psychological damage." Robert Johnson leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped around his cane. "You'll need land, facilities, funding, and the racing establishment won't appreciate being told they've been doing it wrong for generations." "That's where you come in, Robert," Dr. Walker smiled. "Your name still opens doors that would remain closed to others." As the adults discussed logistics, Jaden's thoughts remained with Thunderstorm. The court order had temporarily halted any decisions about the horse's future, but Thornton still legally owned him. The uncertainty weighed heavily on the boy who had promised his four-legged friend he wouldn't abandon him. Across town, Thornton was locked in tense negotiations with his legal team. The preliminary assessment had revealed troubling facts: multiple violations of animal welfare standards, potential labor law issues regarding his treatment of Jaden, and the possibility of a very public legal battle that would further damage his standing in racing circles. "The optics are terrible," his lead attorney explained bluntly. "Fighting this makes you look like a villain persecuting a homeless child and an injured horse. The public has already decided who the hero is in this story." "So what are you suggesting?" Thornton demanded. "That I simply capitulate? Give up a $2 million investment because of some emotional media circus?" The PR consultant cleared her throat. "Not capitulate, Mr. Thornton. Transform. This could be your redemption story." 3 days later, local media reported that William Thornton III was considering a generous donation of land and resources toward a proposed equine therapy foundation. The announcement caught Jaden and his supporters by surprise. "He's trying to rewrite the narrative," Miguel observed cynically as they gathered at the Martinez's modest home. "Turn himself from villain to philanthropist." "But why would he give up Thunderstorm?" Jaden asked, the only question that truly mattered to him. "Because fighting you has become more expensive than appearing generous," Robert replied with the wisdom of decades navigating racing politics. "Thornton calculates everything in dollars and cents. Right now, your connection with that horse is worth more as a story he can attach his name to than as an asset he can sell. The negotiations proceeded through intermediaries, with Thornton refusing direct meetings, a testament to his wounded pride. His team proposed an arrangement where he would donate 5 acres of Havenbrook's least valuable land and transfer ownership of Thunderstorm to the newly formed foundation, with several conditions. The foundation would bear the Thornton name, and he would be recognized as founder and primary benefactor. "He wants to buy himself a halo," Sarah remarked disgustedly when Miguel presented the terms. "Let him," Robert countered pragmatically. "If his ego needs stroking to do the right thing, so be it. What matters is the outcome." For Jayden, these high-level negotiations seemed distant from the daily reality of working with Thunderstorm. Each morning he still visited the horse, whose recovery continued steadily. The thoroughbred's physical condition improved noticeably, coat regaining its gleam, muscle tone returning to his powerful frame. More significant were the psychological changes. Thunderstorm no longer startled at sudden movements, allowed Joe and Sarah to approach without Jayden present, and had begun responding to basic voice commands from others. "He's not just tolerating humans now," Sarah observed during an evaluation. "He's actually seeking connection. That's the difference between compliance and healing." While Thunderstorm's fate was debated in offices and conference rooms, Miguel Ramirez was working on a parallel challenge: Jayden's legal status. The investigation into potential foster placements had uncovered something unexpected: the Martinez's genuine desire to provide Jayden a permanent home. "We have discussed this many times," Mrs. Martinez explained when Miguel visited their home. "Carlos and I always dreamed of children, but God had other plans." Her husband nodded in agreement, his weathered face softening. "Watching Jayden with Thunderstorm," Carlos added quietly, "we see something special, a heart that understands without words. Our house is small, but there is room." The revelation stunned Jayden, who had spent years avoiding attachment after too many temporary families. The possibility of belonging somewhere, of having people who wanted him, not just took him in, seemed almost too fragile to believe. Meanwhile, Thornton's inner circle noticed a shift in the oil magnate's behavior. After the initial fury subsided, he became obsessed with controlling the emerging narrative. Teams of lawyers and PR consultants filed through his study daily, crafting statements and planning strategies. His public remarks about identifying underserved youth with special abilities were carefully designed to suggest he had discovered Jayden rather than threatened him. "Turn this into a redemption story," his lead PR consultant advised during a late-night strategy session. The philanthropist who recognized unique talent and created an opportunity for it to flourish. The public loves nothing more than a wealthy man learning compassion. Thornton, nursing his third bourbon, nodded thoughtfully. The calculation was clear. Fighting would be costly and damaging. Embracing the situation, controlling it, offered better prospects for his reputation. By the following week, press releases announced William Thornton III's vision for the Thornton Foundation for Equine Therapy, describing it as a natural evolution of Havenbrook's commitment to innovative training methods. No mention was made of court orders, investigations, or Jayden's discovery of Thunderstorm before Thornton even knew the boy existed. Sarah read the announcement with disgust. "He's rewriting history before it's even finished happening." "That's what men like Thornton do," her father replied. "But we know the truth, and more importantly, so does that horse." The foundation took shape with remarkable speed, accelerated by both Thornton's resources and the groundswell of support from Lexington's equestrian community. The small corner of Havenbrook property, conveniently distant from the main facilities, was surveyed for renovation. Architects drew plans for specialized stables designed for traumatized horses. Volunteer coordinators began organizing former jockeys and experienced handlers willing to learn new methods. Throughout this whirlwind of activity, Jayden remained focused on Thunderstorm, whose progress continued to inspire everyone involved. Sarah brought specialists to observe their sessions, documenting techniques that could be taught to others. Video recordings captured the subtle body language and quiet patience that characterized Jayden's approach. "You can't teach empathy. Robert remarked to his daughter after watching one particularly moving session. That boy has something born, not made. The most remarkable development came not from the official meetings or press announcements, but from the growing community that formed around the nascent foundation. Small breeders offered additional land for expansion. Veterinary students volunteered time to document rehabilitation methods. Feed suppliers donated grain and hay. What had begun as one boy's connection to one horse was expanding into a movement that transcended Thornton's attempts to claim it as his creation. For Jaden, whose world had been defined by loss and impermanence, this burgeoning community represented something he scarcely dared acknowledge: the possibility of belonging. The Martinez's invitation to their home for dinner became a regular occurrence. Their modest house, filled with the aromas of Mrs. Martinez's cooking and the dignity of hardworking people who owned little but valued much, began to feel like something Jaden had forgotten: a home. Miguel's work on the adoption process continued quietly but steadily, navigating the labyrinthine bureaucracy of child welfare systems. "The Martinezes have impeccable references," he reported to Jaden during one of their meetings. "Their application is strong. For the first time, you'll have a choice about your future." As for Thornton, his initial strategy of claimed philanthropy gradually transformed into genuine distance. After the first publicity photographs showing him ceremonially turning earth for the foundation's facilities, he appeared increasingly less often. His attention shifted to new investments, new opportunities where his control remained absolute. "He's using this to rehabilitate his image, then he'll disappear," Joe predicted accurately. "Men like him don't change, they just adapt their tactics." On the evening before the official announcement of the Thornton Foundation for Equine Therapy, Jaden found himself alone with Thunderstorm in the quiet stable. The horse, now healthy and calm, rested his head gently on the boy's shoulder, a gesture that had become their ritual of mutual recognition. "We made it, big guy," Jaden whispered, stroking the silky neck. "Somehow, we both made it." The peaceful moment was interrupted by the sound of expensive shoes on concrete. Jaden turned to see William Thornton III standing in the stable doorway, alone for once, without his entourage of lawyers and advisors. "Enjoying your victory, boy?" Thornton asked, his voice carrying the slight slur of early evening bourbon. Jaden said nothing, instinctively placing a protective hand on Thunderstorm's neck. Thornton laughed mirthlessly. "Don't worry, I'm not here to cause trouble. Just wanted to see this miracle horse one last time before tomorrow's circus." He stepped closer, stopping when Thunderstorm's ears pinned back in warning. "Smart animal," Thornton mused. "Knows who's genuine and who isn't." His eyes narrowed as he studied Jaden. "Don't get too comfortable with all this attention. When the cameras go away and the public loses interest, things have a way of returning to normal." Leaning slightly forward, voice lowered so no potential witnesses could hear, Thornton revealed his true perspective. "Don't be mistaken, boy. This is just marketing for me. When the cameras are gone and public interest fades, everything will return to normal. Horses exist to generate profit, not receive therapy. And you're just a temporary accessory in this spectacle." Thornton's words hung in the air like poison, revealing the calculated cynicism behind his public transformation. Jaden stood motionless, hand still resting on Thunderstorm's neck, as the magnate turned and walked away, his expensive shoes clicking on the concrete floor. Only when Thornton had disappeared into the darkness did Jaden exhale, a tremor running through his body. "He's right about one thing," he whispered to Thunderstorm. "When the cameras go away, everything changes." That night, sleep eluded Jaden. In his small room in the staff quarters, he stared at the ceiling, Thornton's threat echoing in his mind. The foundation, Thunderstorm's safety, his own precarious position, all seemed suddenly built on shifting sand. By dawn, dark circles rimmed his eyes, but a new determination had solidified within him. The day of the charity event arrived with picture-perfect Kentucky weather. Azure skies, gentle breezes carrying the scent of bluegrass and clover. Havenbrook's grounds had been transformed overnight, an army of workers erecting elegant white tents, arranging flower displays, and positioning the Thornton Foundation banners strategically for maximum visibility in photographs. Catering trucks disgorged uniformed staff bearing silver trays and champagne flutes. "Quite the spectacle," Robert Johnson remarked as he arrived with Sarah, surveying the ostentatious display. "Thornton never does anything by halves when there's publicity involved." Inside the main guest tent, a consultant had cornered Jaden, attempting to coach him on etiquette and appropriate responses to media questions. "Remember to mention Mr. Thornton's visionary approach," the woman instructed, adjusting Jaden's borrowed tie with manicured fingers. "When asked about your background, emphasize how grateful you are for this opportunity." Jaden nodded mechanically, discomfort evident in his rigid posture and downcast eyes. The new clothes, a blazer and pressed khakis, felt like a costume, another layer of Thornton's fiction. "May I speak with Jaden privately?" came Sarah's voice, rescuing him from the consultant's instructions. When they were alone, Sarah knelt to meet his eyes directly. "Listen to me, Jaden. What Thornton said to you last night, Miguel told me. We're not going to let him rewrite this story and discard you when the cameras leave." "He'll find a way," Jaden replied, voicing his deepest fear. "People like him always win." "Not always," Sarah countered. "That's why we've made preparations. The legal documents Miguel has prepared go far beyond what Thornton's team is expecting. This isn't just about a land donation and a publicity stunt. It's about binding commitments." Outside, limousines and luxury vehicles began arriving, disgorging Kentucky's elite: horse breeders, racing officials, state politicians, and wealthy donors. Thornton greeted each with practiced charm, playing the benevolent host who had discovered a diamond in the rough. In Thunderstorm's temporary paddock, situated prominently for guests to admire, Jaden found momentary solace with his friend. The horse seemed to sense his anxiety, lowering his head to press his forehead against the boy's chest, their private ritual of mutual reassurance. "We need to show them the truth today," Jaden whispered, "not Thornton's version." As more guests arrived, Jaden watched the Martinez family enter hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable among the wealthy attendees. Mrs. Martinez had worn her church dress, Carlos his only suit. They stood awkwardly at the periphery until Miguel Ramirez approached, guiding them to seats reserved near the front, a deliberate positioning that hadn't been on Thornton's seating chart. By mid-afternoon, the event was in full swing. Champagne flowed freely as Thornton worked the crowd, accepting congratulations for his visionary philanthropy and commitment to innovative rehabilitation techniques. With each handshake and backslap, his confidence visibly grew, his initial humiliation transforming into triumph. From the sidelines, Robert Johnson watched with the patience of a man who had seen generations of racing politics play out. "He thinks he's winning," he murmured to his daughter. "Time to change the game." As scheduled, Thornton took the podium to deliver his carefully crafted speech about bridging tradition and compassion in the racing world. He spoke eloquently of second chances, for horses, for disadvantaged youth, positioning himself as the architect of a revolutionary approach to equine care. "When I first recognized the extraordinary connection between this young man and Thunderstorm," Thornton declared, gesturing toward Jaden, who sat uncomfortably in the front row, "I knew we had a responsibility to nurture that gift and share it with the world." The crowd applauded appreciatively, buying the narrative completely. Cameras flashed, recording the moment for tomorrow's society pages. Thornton basked in the approval, his redemption seemingly complete. Then Sarah Johnson stepped forward, taking the microphone with such professional confidence that Thornton had no opportunity to object. "To truly demonstrate what makes the foundation special," she announced, "I'd like to propose something unscripted. The essence of our approach is that horses respond to truth, not to training techniques, not to dominance, but to genuine connection." The crowd murmured with interest as Sarah continued. "I suggest a simple demonstration. Both Mr. Thornton and Jaden will enter the paddock where Thunderstorm is currently free. No halters, no leads, no treats. Let's allow the horse himself to show us what this foundation is truly about." A ripple of excitement passed through the audience. Thornton's smile froze. a flicker of panic crossing his features before he regained composure. To refuse would undermine everything he'd claimed about his relationship with the project. "An excellent suggestion," he replied smoothly, though those closest could see the tension in his jaw. "I'm always game for impromptu demonstrations." The crowd migrated toward Thunderstorm's paddock, a spacious enclosure where the black thoroughbred grazed peacefully. As Thornton and Jaden approached the gate, Sarah spoke again, her voice carrying to the assembled guests. "Horses don't lie," she stated simply. "They recognize the truth in our hearts better than any lie detector. Let's see who Thunderstorm chooses today." Inside the paddock, Thornton's confidence began to falter. Up close, the massive thoroughbred, nearly 17 hands high, seemed far more intimidating than when viewed from a distance. Recovering quickly, he reached into his pocket and produced a carrot, holding it out while calling to the horse with false affability. "Come on, boy. Remember me? The one who pays for all that premium feed?" Jaden simply stood quietly on the opposite side of the enclosure, making no sound, offering nothing. His posture was relaxed, hands open at his sides, eyes soft as they connected with Thunderstorm's across the distance. The horse raised his head, assessing both humans with the primal instinct of a prey animal that has learned to distinguish friend from threat. His ears swiveled, nostrils flared, taking in scents and sounds. The assembled crowd fell silent, sensing they were witnessing something significant. Thunderstorm began to move, his powerful legs carrying him in a deliberate path. He approached Thornton first, and for a moment, the magnate's face lit with vindication. But the horse merely sniffed the carrot without taking it, then continued past Thornton as if he were an uninteresting obstacle. With unwavering purpose, Thunderstorm crossed to where Jaden stood waiting. Without hesitation, the massive animal lowered his head, gently resting his muzzle on the boy's shoulder in their familiar greeting. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by spontaneous applause that echoed across Havenbrook's manicured grounds. "Some bonds cannot be purchased," Robert Johnson commented into the microphone, his weathered voice carrying wisdom earned through decades with horses. "Some must be earned." The moment was captured by dozens of cameras, the multi-million-dollar thoroughbred choosing the homeless boy over the wealthy owner, truth asserting itself despite all attempts at manipulation. Thornton stood alone in the paddock, the rejected carrot still in his hand, his carefully constructed narrative crumbling before everyone who mattered in Kentucky racing. As Jaden and Thunderstorm demonstrated their extraordinary connection with a few simple movements around the paddock, Miguel Ramirez quietly circulated among key officials, foundation board members, and witnesses. He carried documents, not the ones Thornton's team had prepared, but revised versions with additional provisions and safeguards. "These guarantee the Foundation's independence," he explained quietly to each signatory, "and ensure that neither Jaden nor Thunderstorm can be separated or removed from the program under any circumstances." By the time Thornton realized what was happening, prominent signatures already filled the pages, binding commitments made in the emotional aftermath of Thunderstorm's unambiguous choice. In full view of cameras and Kentucky's elite, Thornton found himself cornered: sign the enhanced agreements or publicly renege on his philanthropic promises. "You planned this," he hissed to Robert Johnson as photographers captured his reluctant signature. "You manipulated me." "No, William," the old trainer replied calmly. "We simply created circumstances where the truth could speak for itself, something you might consider trying someday." As the event concluded, guests departed with a story far different from the one Thornton had scripted. Rather than a tale of a magnate's generosity, they carried away the image of an animal's honest judgment, choosing authenticity over authority, connection over control. The Martinez family waited until most guests had departed before approaching Jaden, who still stood with Thunderstorm in the paddock. "You were very brave today," Mrs. Martinez said softly, "standing before all those important people." "The horse did the hard part," Jaden replied with a small smile. "He just told the truth." Carlos cleared his throat, unaccustomed to emotional declarations. "Miguel tells us the papers for the adoption are moving forward. If you still wish it, of course. Jayden looked between them. These people who had offered him something he'd stopped believing in. A home, a family, belonging. I wish it, he said simply, the words carrying all he couldn't express. As twilight descended on Havenbrook, turning the bluegrass to silver in the fading light, Thornton watched from his study window as his charity event concluded. His face hardened as he saw Jayden walking between the Martinez couple, Thunderstorm following without restraint, the four figures silhouetted against the sunset like a family portrait. "This isn't over," he muttered, reaching for the telephone. "Jenkins, I need you to look into something regarding that foster kid, Jayden Carter. I've just learned some concerning information that might affect his placement status." While the cameras continued to roll, Miguel Ramirez presented documents for Thornton to sign immediately, including not just the promised donation but additional guarantees of independence for the foundation and legal custodial arrangements for the Martinez family over Jayden, all under the watchful eyes of Kentucky's elite and the media. Jenkins's eager voice on the phone promised Thornton immediate action, but the damage had already been done. The documents Miguel had presented, signed under the watchful eyes of Kentucky's elite, weren't merely suggestions. They were legally binding commitments. Still, Thornton wasn't a man who accepted defeat easily. Spring unfolded across Kentucky's rolling hills, transforming Havenbrook's dedicated acres into a canvas of new beginnings. The renovations progressed with remarkable speed, fueled by both Thornton's reluctant funds and the groundswell of community support. Old stables were reimagined with wider stalls and natural lighting. Paddocks were redesigned with traumatized horses in mind. Higher fences for security, but with clear sightlines to prevent the anxiety of isolation. "It's incredible how many people want to help," Sarah remarked one morning as she surveyed the property with Jayden. Local carpenters had volunteered weekends to build specialized equipment. Retired trainers offered expertise. Feed stores donated supplies. "People care more than I thought," Jayden replied, still surprised by the community's response. The foundation's first board meeting established its operational structure. Sarah as director, Robert as chief consultant, the Martinezes as residential managers. Thornton attended only long enough for the publicity photographs, his smile fixed but eyes cold, before excusing himself to more pressing business engagements. As Joe had predicted, once the initial media attention faded, Thornton's interest in the foundation bearing his name waned rapidly. "He'll show up for fundraisers and photo ops," Robert observed, "when there are cameras and potential donors. The rest of the time, we're better off without his interference." True to Robert's prediction, Thornton's appearances became increasingly ceremonial and brief. He would arrive in his Bentley, shake the necessary hands, pose beside whatever progress had been made, then depart before becoming involved in actual decisions. His name adorned the foundation's letterhead, but his presence grew increasingly phantom-like. Meanwhile, the first horses began arriving, each with histories that echoed Thunderstorm's trauma. A mare who'd survived a trailer accident that killed 3 other horses. A former show jumper who'd developed debilitating anxiety after an abusive trainer. A retired police horse who couldn't distinguish between normal street sounds and the riot that had once left him injured. Jayden spent hours observing each new arrival, studying their unique stress responses. "This one holds fear in his shoulders," he explained to a volunteer, pointing to a trembling Appaloosa. "That one shows it in her breathing. They speak different dialects of the same language." Sarah documented these observations meticulously, building a framework for assessment and treatment that combined Jayden's intuitive understanding with veterinary science. "We're creating something entirely new here," she told her father proudly. "Not just rehabilitation, but a whole new approach to equine psychology." The foundation implemented Jayden's methods systematically. New horses were given time to acclimate without pressure. Handlers were taught to recognize subtle signs of anxiety before they escalated. Most revolutionary was the core principle that horses would be allowed to set boundaries, to retreat when overwhelmed, to approach when ready. "This makes no sense," complained one traditional trainer who visited. "You're letting the animal decide? That's backward." "Is it backward to listen when someone's in pain?" Jayden countered quietly. Or is it backward to ignore them because it's inconvenient? As word spread about the Foundation's approach, unexpected visitors began appearing. Veterans with PTSD arrived first, drawn by articles describing parallels between their experiences and the horse's trauma responses. The first was a former Marine named Evan, whose therapist had suggested the visit. "I understand hypervigilance," Evan explained hesitantly to Jaden after watching him work with Thunderstorm. "Always scanning for threats, never really at rest. It's exhausting." "That's exactly what Thunderstorm was doing when I first met him," Jaden nodded, living in his fight-or-flight response. More veterans followed, many finding unexpected solace in working with animals who understood trauma without requiring words. Then came others, children from abuse shelters, first responders struggling with burnout, adults recovering from accidents. What began as a horse rehabilitation program organically expanded into something more comprehensive. Throughout these developments, Jaden's legal situation progressed steadily. Miguel Ramirez navigated the adoption process with professional precision, filing paperwork, arranging home studies, advocating tirelessly. "The Martinezes have impeccable references," he reported during one meeting. "Their application is strong. The home study went perfectly." He smiled at Jaden. "For the first time in years, you have real choice in your future." The possibility of permanent family still felt surreal to Jaden after so long adrift. The Martinez's modest home had become his anchor, a place where dinner was served at the same time each evening, where his belongings remained undisturbed, where questions about his day were asked with genuine interest. One evening, Carlos took Jaden to the small room they had prepared for him. "We have been saving for better furniture," he apologized, gesturing to the simple bed and desk. "But we thought perhaps you would like to choose your own things. Make it truly yours." The concept of ownership, of having possessions that wouldn't be left behind in the next move, struck Jaden deeply. That night, sleeping in a bed that would still be his tomorrow, he allowed himself to imagine permanence. As the Foundation's reputation grew, so did scrutiny of Thornton's other business practices. Investigative reporters, initially drawn by the heartwarming story of Jaden and Thunderstorm, began examining conditions at Thornton's other racing operations. What they found painted a pattern consistent with Havenbrook's previous practices: cutting corners on veterinary care, prioritizing profit over welfare, discarding animals once their earning potential diminished. The first expose appeared in the Louisville Courier-Journal, followed by pieces in racing industry publications. Thornton's attorneys managed to suppress the most damaging allegations, but the whispers spread throughout Kentucky's racing community. For a man whose currency was reputation and social standing, the subtle withdrawals of invitations and cooling of business relationships proved costly in ways money couldn't fix. Thunderstorm, meanwhile, continued his remarkable transformation. His physical recovery was complete: glossy coat, restored muscle tone, clear eyes. More profound was his psychological healing. The horse who once attacked anyone approaching his stall now allowed children to stroke his nose under Jaden's supervision. The animal who couldn't tolerate loud noises could now remain calm during thunderstorms. "He's become our best teacher," Sarah observed, watching Thunderstorm demonstrate perfect patience with a traumatized mare who had just arrived. "He shows the others that recovery is possible." On a perfect Kentucky morning 6 months after the Foundation's establishment, Jaden registered for school, his first formal education in over 2 years. The Martinez family drove him together, Carlos taking a rare day off from work. "Education is the foundation of all opportunity," Mrs. Martinez said firmly as they approached the school building. "Your gift with horses is special, but knowledge opens many doors." The transition proved challenging. Academic gaps from years of transience required intensive tutoring. Social dynamics bewildered Jaden after so long operating at society's margins. Yet gradually he found his footing, especially when his unique experience with the Foundation earned respect from classmates, initially inclined to dismiss the weird horse kid. His 14th birthday arrived in autumn, celebrated with the first real party of his life. The Martinez home filled with an unlikely assortment of guests: Sarah and Robert Johnson, Miguel Ramirez, Joe and other Havenbrook staff, school friends still getting to know him, veterans who had become Foundation volunteers. Mrs. Martinez prepared traditional Mexican dishes alongside an American birthday cake, a blend of cultures that perfectly represented their evolving family. "Make a wish," Mrs. Martinez urged as Jaden faced the flickering candles. He closed his eyes briefly, then blew. What he wished for, he kept private, though the way his gaze drifted to the adoption papers awaiting final court approval, prominently displayed on the mantel, offered clues. By winter, the foundation had expanded to accommodate 15 horses and operated programs serving over 100 human participants weekly. Former jockeys with career-ending injuries found purpose teaching therapeutic riding. Agricultural students from the local community college conducted research projects on natural horsemanship techniques. What had begun as one boy's connection to one horse had rippled outward in ways no one could have predicted. Through it all, Thunderstorm remained Jaden's special charge, their bond deepening with each season. The horse who once couldn't tolerate human touch now carried disabled children on gentle walks, somehow understanding the need for extra steadiness with these vulnerable riders. The animal, once driven mad by trauma, had become an ambassador of healing. "How did you know he could recover?" a new volunteer asked Jaden while watching Thunderstorm contentedly grazing in the spring sunshine. "I didn't know," Jaden admitted. "I just believed he deserved the chance." On a crisp morning in late April, with dogwoods blooming across Kentucky, Jaden arrived at school to find Miguel Ramirez waiting in the principal's office, his expression uncharacteristically grave. "What's wrong?" Jaden asked immediately, his mind racing to worst-case scenarios. Something had happened to the Martinezes, or to Thunderstorm. "I received a call from the family court this morning," Miguel explained carefully. "A distant relative of yours has suddenly appeared, claiming custodial rights." The blood drained from Jaden's face. "I don't have any relatives. My parents were both only children. Their parents are dead." "This man claims to be your mother's cousin," Miguel continued, his skepticism evident. "He's filed paperwork stating he only recently discovered your existence and wants to reunite the family." Jaden's hands began to tremble. Coincidentally, after the foundation got national attention. "Exactly my thought," Miguel agreed grimly. "I've already started investigating. This supposed uncle received a substantial bank deposit last week from a holding company that, with some digging, connects back to Thornton Enterprises. The implication hung heavy between them. After months of apparent withdrawal, Thornton had found a new angle of attack, one aimed at the heart of what Jaden valued most, his newfound family and home. On the eve of the ceremony that would finalize Jaden's adoption by the Martinez family, the boy found a figure waiting unexpectedly in the foundation's office. His alleged uncle, a man he had never seen before, holding legal papers and wearing a grave expression. "Jaden Carter? We need to discuss your legal situation. There have been some complications." Jaden stared at the stranger claiming to be his uncle, a heavy-set man with thinning hair and eyes that never quite met his. The alleged relative clutched legal papers in hands, adorned with a gold watch that seemed too new, too shiny. "There must be some mistake," Jaden managed, his voice steadier than he felt. "My mother had no siblings, no cousins that I ever knew about." "Your mother and I weren't close," the man, who had introduced himself as Frank Mercer, replied with practiced sadness. "Family disagreement years ago. When I saw you on the news with that horse, I couldn't believe it. My cousin's boy, alive and well." Miguel Ramirez stepped forward, his professional demeanor masking the anger Jaden could sense beneath. "Mr. Mercer, the timing of your appearance is remarkably convenient. The adoption hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning." Frank shrugged, a gesture that seemed rehearsed. "Can't help the timing. Law says blood relatives get priority over non-related adopters. Nothing personal against the Mexican folks." The casual prejudice in his tone made Jaden's hands clench. "Their name is Martinez," he corrected sharply. "And they're more family to me than anyone who shows up with papers, but no memories." The news spread through the foundation like wildfire. By evening, the Martinez home had become command central for an impromptu resistance. Sarah Johnson arrived with her father. Miguel spread legal documents across the dining table, and Joe Williams brought coffee for everyone, his weathered face grim with determination. "This stinks of Thornton," Robert Johnson declared, tapping his cane against the floor for emphasis. "Too neat, too calculated. The man can't stand losing." Miguel nodded, phone pressed to his ear as he coordinated with his investigative team. "My people are digging into Mercer's background now. If there's a connection to Thornton, we'll find it." Mrs. Martinez moved quietly through the gathering, providing food that no one had appetite for, her eyes repeatedly drifting to Jaden. In the kitchen, away from the others, she finally spoke her fear. "Are they going to take you from us, mijo?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jaden, who had faced abandonment so many times before, found himself in the unfamiliar position of offering reassurance. "No," he said with conviction he didn't entirely feel. "You're my family, the only real one I've had since my parents died." Carlos placed his hand on Jaden's shoulder, his grip firm. "In Mexico, my father taught me, family is not blood. Family is who stands beside you in the storm." That night, Jaden couldn't sleep. He slipped out of the house before dawn, making his way to the foundation property where Thunderstorm was stabled. The massive black horse sensed his distress immediately, nickering softly as Jaden entered his stall. "They might separate us," Jaden whispered, burying his face in the coarse mane. Thornton found a way after all. Thunderstorm shifted, his body language changing subtly as he picked up on Jaden's anxiety. His ears flicked forward and back, nostrils flaring slightly, the early warning signs of stress that Jaden had taught the Foundation volunteers to recognize. "I'm sorry," Jaden soothed, deliberately slowing his breathing. "I'm upsetting you. It's okay, big guy. We've faced worse, right?" By sunrise, Miguel's team had unearthed the connection. Frank Mercer, a twice-divorced handyman from Louisville with gambling debts, had received a $50,000 deposit 3 days before filing his claim of kinship. The money came from a shell company that, through a labyrinth of subsidiaries, connected back to Thornton Enterprises. "It's not enough for court," Miguel warned as they gathered in his office. "The connection is obscured by too many layers. We need Mercer himself to admit the arrangement." The morning of the hearing arrived with perfect Kentucky spring weather that seemed to mock the gravity of the proceedings. The county courthouse, a limestone building that had witnessed generations of local justice, filled with an unexpected crowd. Veterans from the Foundation program lined the hallway. Neighbors of the Martinezes occupied front row seats. Sarah's veterinary colleagues stood against the back wall. Most surprising was the appearance of local media, alerted by an anonymous tip, positioning cameras outside the courtroom doors. Judge Eleanor Wilson, a silver-haired woman with 30 years on the bench, surveyed the packed courtroom with raised eyebrows. "Seems we have quite an audience for what should be a straightforward family matter." Mercer's attorney, a polished man in an expensive suit that suggested fees beyond a handyman's budget, presented the case first. "Your Honor, state law is clear on this matter. Blood relatives have priority in custody cases. Mr. Mercer only recently discovered his young cousin was in the foster system and immediately took steps to reunite their family." Judge Wilson turned to Miguel. "Counselor Ramirez, I understand you question the timing and motivation of Mr. Mercer's claim?" "Indeed, Your Honor." Miguel approached the bench, his demeanor calm but intent. "The timing is not merely suspicious. It's calculated. Mr. Mercer appeared precisely when Jaden Carter found stability after years in the system, when he gained national attention for his work with traumatized horses, and exactly 1 day before his adoption would become final." As legal arguments continued, Jaden studied Frank Mercer, trying to find any resemblance to his mother. Her warm eyes, her gentle hands, the way her nose crinkled when she laughed. There was nothing. This stranger shared no features, no mannerisms, nothing that suggested shared blood. When Jaden's turn to testify came, he approached the witness stand with the same quiet confidence he used when approaching a frightened horse. Judge Wilson softened her formal demeanor slightly. "Jaden, I understand you've had a difficult journey through the foster care system. can you tell me about your life with the Martinez family? Jaden took a deep breath, looking directly at Mrs. Martinez, whose eyes shone with unshed tears. They gave me what I stopped believing existed, a home where I'm not just tolerated but wanted. Mrs. Martinez asks about my day and actually listens to the answer. Mr. Martinez taught me to change oil in a car and fix a leaky faucet. They come to school meetings and remember what foods I like. His voice strengthened. They're the first people since my parents died who made me feel like I belonged somewhere, like I mattered. And this relative? Judge Wilson asked, gesturing toward Mercer. Did your mother ever mention him? No, Your Honor. My mother told me stories about her whole family. She never once mentioned a cousin named Frank. The questioning continued, with character witnesses rising one after another to support the Martinezes. Joe Williams described how Mrs. Martinez had secretly left food for Jaden long before the foundation existed. Sarah Johnson testified to the extraordinary home environment they provided. Even Jaden's science teacher appeared, describing his rapid academic progress in a stable home setting. Then came a surprise witness, a stable hand from another of Thornton's properties who nervously described overhearing a phone call where Thornton explicitly discussed finding someone to claim the boy and making it worth their while. As the evidence mounted, Frank Mercer began to shift uncomfortably in his seat, his attorney leaning over to whisper urgently in his ear. During a brief recess, Jaden overheard fragments of their heated conversation. Perjury charges, and not worth the risk. When court resumed, Mercer's attorney requested a private conference with the judge. After 15 tense minutes, Judge Wilson returned to the bench, her expression stern. Mr. Mercer has withdrawn his petition for custody, she announced. In light of this development and the overwhelming evidence of a stable, loving home with the Martinez family, I see no reason to delay these proceedings further. She looked directly at Jaden. Young man, the law exists to protect children, not to use them as pawns in adult games. It's clear to this court where you belong. With a strike of her gavel, Judge Wilson granted the adoption petition. Congratulations to the Martinez family on their new son. The courtroom erupted in applause. Mrs. Martinez sobbed openly, while Carlos maintained his dignity despite the tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. Jaden found himself surrounded by his unlikely family, the Martinezes, Sarah and Robert, Joe, the veterans and volunteers who had become part of his expanded world. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around Miguel, who delivered a carefully worded statement about justice prevailing despite apparent attempts to manipulate the system. He avoided direct accusations against Thornton, but the implication hung clearly in the spring air. Frank Mercer slipped away through a side door, his moment in Thornton's employ finished, his conscience visibly relieved at escaping potential legal consequences. That evening, the Martinez home filled with neighbors bearing casseroles and congratulations. The modest house overflowed with laughter and conversation in a blend of English and Spanish. Jaden, overwhelmed by the day's emotions, eventually slipped outside to sit on the porch steps, staring up at stars appearing in the deepening twilight. Carlos joined him, offering a cup of hot chocolate in comfortable silence before finally speaking. Tomorrow we go to the foundation together, as family. Official on paper now, but always true in heart. Later that night, after the guests departed, Mrs. Martinez led Jaden to his room. Not just a room in their house now, but legally, permanently his. On the bed lay a small wooden box. This was my father's, she explained, for special things, memories, treasures. Now it is yours. Inside, Jaden placed his father's harmonica, a photograph of his parents, and the official adoption certificate, tangible proof of belonging. The following morning, spring sunlight bathed the rolling hills of the foundation property as the Martinez family arrived together. Thunderstorm nickered a greeting from his paddock, sensing the shift in Jaden's energy. The massive horse who had once been declared dangerous now moved with the relaxed confidence of an animal who felt secure in his world. At the main building, a crowd gathered for what had been planned as a small ceremony but had blossomed into a community celebration. Sarah Johnson officially opened the expanded facilities, where a discreet plaque acknowledged donors but emphasized the foundation's mission rather than any individual's contribution. Thornton's name appeared, but no larger than others who had contributed far less financially, but far more in spirit. As Jaden led Thunderstorm in a demonstration for visitors, showing the gentle communication that had revolutionized equine therapy, he caught sight of something unexpected. William Thornton III, standing at the property's edge, watching from beside his Bentley. Their eyes met briefly across the distance. Then Thornton turned and entered his car, driving away from the foundation that bore his name but embodied none of his values. That evening, as the golden light of sunset spilled across the Kentucky hills, visitors to the foundation witnessed what had become an iconic sight. Jaden and Thunderstorm galloping freely across open fields. No saddle, no bridle, moving as one being. Man and horse, once broken in different ways, now whole in their partnership. Under the star-filled sky, Jaden sat in the renovated stable, surrounded by other young people from the program. Some orphans like him, others from troubled homes finding purpose in helping animals heal. Thunderstorm rested comfortably nearby, ears attentive to the harmonica that Jaden now played with practiced skill. "People always ask how I did it," Jaden told the newcomers, watching him with admiration. "The truth is simple. It wasn't something I did to Thunderstorm. It was something we did together. Sometimes, the most broken souls recognize each other, and in that recognition, they find healing." As he spoke, his eyes met those of his adoptive father standing in the stable doorway, and for the first time in his life, Jaden felt he had finally come home.